Welcome, everyone, to Dark Loops Productions, She-Hulking, a podcast for discussing Marvel's new series, She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, a.k.a. Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist philosopher at Illinois State University.
Hi, I am Dr. Shelly Clevenger. I am chair and professor at Sam Houston State University, Department of Victim Studies.
Fantastic. Today we've come together to discuss episode 4, Is This Not Real Magic? Joining us on the program, two of our best friends, Dr. Eric Wesselmann, Mr. Daniel Jun Kim. Eric, please tell us a little something about who you are and why you like this show.
So I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann. I'm a social psychology professor at Illinois State University, a fan of all things nerdy, and I love being able to connect my work to it whenever possible. I mean, there's a lot of things that I enjoy about this show, and I think I'll just kind of focus on the sort of humor element to it. I mean, it's a different storytelling type than all of the other Marvel shows and films, which I think is a good thing. I love diversity of storytelling, and it just and the breaking of the fourth wall. I mean, just very much kind of sort of connecting to the audience and being like, yeah, I'm thinking what you're thinking. This is an absurd situation. It's just something that I very much enjoy.
Excellent. Glad you're here. How about you, Daniel?
Yes, hey everyone, I'm Daniel, but in the blogging and podcasting world, I'm better known as the Pop Mythologist. And I currently run a podcast called This Is the End, which looks at societal breakdown and collapse through the lens of pop culture. Thanks for inviting me on today's episode, Scott.
Glad you're here.
And yeah, like Eric, I also like the comedic aspect of the show. I mean, I don't know why. I took a brief look on like Twitter, and I just immediately turned it off because I don't know what people want. You want the same thing every time, the same kind of storytelling every time. It's like, you know, you want everything to be Avengers Infinity War. I don't really get it. I like that it's very different. I like that it's shorter, funnier, in some ways lighter. Of course, as a Californian, I appreciate that it's brought the MCU back to LA, and I enjoy seeing the LA downtown LA skyline and things like that. So yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this show. I look forward to discussing it.
Excellent. So I think we're gonna ask Shelly to go first, please. Favorite scene, character line, or if you just have a general question for us to riff on, we'll go from there.
Sure. So at the opening scene this week, we see her dad come over with lots of materials
The shovel.
because she had been a crime victim. And so I'm a victimologist. So this is, of course, where I honed in on looking at that. He still wanted to protect her, right? Even though she's basically indestructible as a Hulk now. And so I loved seeing that care in there. And then I also love personally when he said, you know, didn't you call the police? And she was like, well, as a prosecutor or former prosecutor, I know they're not going to catch them. So I loved seeing both of those things, both a comment on the system and seeing her dad being a dad. So my kind of question or things I want to ask the group is, what did you all think about that scene and seeing her interaction with her dad?
Yeah, Eric and Daniel, you guys go ahead and answer first, because I definitely got something to say, but go ahead.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, well, the way I looked at that moment was, it was just kind of like the way our parents treat us. It's like no matter how old we are or how grown or how careful, they're always worried, right? My mom sometimes, and my mom still says stuff, right? Like don't be out too late. I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you know how old I am? You know, like, like they just think you're always a little kid that needs protecting. And so I just kind of like saw it as a parent's love and protectiveness of their child, no matter what, no matter how strong or old or careful they are. And so, yeah, it was very sweet. It was very funny. The shovel, I really enjoyed that. Yeah, you know, Shelly, I'm glad you brought that up because I almost forgot about it. But I really kind of perked up in that moment when she mentions, you know, as a prosecutor, I know that they would be caught. I was like, whoa. And I kind of almost wanted to pause it for a moment because it was kind of like one of these things where if you're not really paying attention, you just kind of like miss it.
Right.
And because it seemed like a really subversive thing to say. for a show that in some ways, I mean, yes, it has like feminist themes, but overall it doesn't feel like in your face subversive much of the time. And part of it maybe because of the humor, but I thought it was a really kind of a strong statement to make in a very sort of mainstream kind of Hollywood show. And it just like passes by just like that. Like they don't linger on it. And so I thought it was really interesting. I don't have any deep insights about it or anything. I'm kind of, I think Shelly, you would have more of that, but I thought it was really interesting though. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Eric? Do you have a reaction?
So I mean, it's much of what's already been said. I resonated with not only was it a fun back and forth, but it does sort of hit at this idea that no matter how old you are, your parents are still going to parent, right? So I've certainly experienced that, as everybody else has mentioned. But I also, because I have several young kids, sort of projected myself into the future, right? So as I was trying to identify with it, be like, yeah, no, I would probably do the same thing if anybody messed with any of my kids, even if they were ridiculously superpowered. I would still want to be like, oh, realize Abomination here in this issue is that they now have a PAX, but I'd be like, oh, Abomination's coming. Okay, fine, I'm gonna get in there, even if I don't have any powers.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you guys have said. I have this phrase I use: identity follows circumstance, and his identity with his daughter is as her father. That's the circumstance all the time. And the only way the only way it would change is if somehow their relationship changed over and over and over again. And then over time, that became the way. And I do think that when our parents and we are making that identity transition together, it takes quite a bit for them to not experience us as someone they have to take care of. It just takes a lot. I'm not saying it can never happen. It just takes quite a bit for that to be the case. And all I can say is, even if you get to a certain point where you think it's not the case, it's still the case, right? And if you're fortunate enough to have been with your kids in a way where they can still come to you with trouble, with concerns later in life, that's pretty damn successful, right? Even if you don't talk to them for months, or even if you just play cards and whatever, if they come back to you later when they're in trouble, that's important. And then I think when we lose our parents, we find ourselves yearning for that on occasion, right? When it's like, oh, who am I going to call? Oh, damn, no one. Everyone else is a peer. Right. And they're not going to give me that same space that my parents would have. So, yeah, I love it. Was what was it? What was the show? Laverne and Shirley, right? That was one of the characters from Laverne and Shirley. So for us, he's a dad. For us who grew up watching that. So it was charming, and the beauty of the writing and the acting, like you guys said, it just came and went. And then like Daniel, you said, the whole comment about, they're never going to find them. Yeah, those are things that they don't commit. There's a famous scene from The Big Lebowski where they find his stolen car. I don't know if you guys, The Big Lebowski car gets stolen, and he said, did you find the Creedence? Because he had some Creedence tapes in the car. And he goes, no, sir, we didn't find the Creedence. I'm sorry, but they make a joke out of the fact that you rarely catch these people. So that's just more of the fantastic writing going on in this show. Daniel, what kind of stuck out to you from this episode? Favorite line, scene, character?
Yeah, it not so much a particular line or scene, so much that I just really appreciating how, for me personally, and for this show, what I'm really enjoying most are like the really, really small, subtle moments. The Jen's reactions to things.
Yeah.
Her facial expressions, little like comments she mutters under her breath, things like that. Versus big lines or big scenes. It's just kind of like these things like peppered all throughout, like with the montage where she's trying to have a decent date, for example. Just little like there was that one moment where, well, so I guess this did stand out, but that one guy's like, "Hey, can we get someone to take our order?" She's like, "Okay."
Ain't
And
happening.
it's just like, yeah, just those little moments and little comments that really subtle reactions that I mean, she just does a brilliant job of conveying those. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's just little things about, I think, this episode in particular, but just the show in general that I'm really enjoying.
And when she went on the date with the doctor and then woke up in the morning and he didn't want anything to do with her. I know.
That broke my heart.
Yeah.
That was
Mhm.
intense.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he understands me. He understands me. No, he doesn't, right? And then I made breakfast and he walks out. That was okay. So for me, that's a writing choice, right? To sort of write the perfect guy and then to make him horrible. But nonetheless, it was still heartbreaking, but well acted, top-notch stuff. Daniel, you mentioned the little reactions that she has. There's just so many fun little moments where she sort of boy-splains what's not going to happen or so for example, when they're in the court and the guy, the magician who's on trial, he says, "What are you scared of some competition, Wong?" And Wong says, "The Sorcerer Supreme does not continue, but I'm more magical than you in my sleep." And she goes, "Okay, no one's going to do magic competition here, right?" And it just diffuses that male toxicity in a quick little heartbeat, little action. I thought that was just brilliant.
I do have a question for you all about this. When you, how do you experience those little asides where she talks either to the camera or just mutters under her breath and doesn't make eye contact with the audience? Do you experience those as actually manifesting themselves in the narrative? Or does she actually say that out loud? Or is that like the sort of inner monologue that we would get in comics and they're just putting having her say it there so they don't have to put in some sort of thought bubble?
I didn't think about it like that before, but it would make sense. Like in the comics, characters do those kinds of things.
Right. And Deadpool's always breaking the fourth wall, right?
Yeah. I mean, I like it. I know people haven't liked it, but I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually, your question's on target, Eric, because I do think it's part of the narrative structure, because the narrative is basically, it's a feminist tale. And the moments where she's looking at us or talking to us, it's her reaction, but it's also her saying, "Do not miss this point," or "I'm not going to let you see me missing this point." Because so much of gender-based harassment, how do I say this, has to do with the fear of standing up in the moment and say, "Don't talk to me like that," right? Or not calling it out consciously in the moment. And that's not me victim blaming. That's me describing the context that underrepresented people and women often experience. So for me, those fourth wall moments are part of the storytelling they're doing for us. And it's like, don't miss this. And you're never going to see me miss this. I'm not going to let you see me ignoring it and pretending like it didn't happen. Okay, I got a question. Oh, go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead.
No. I didn't really have a comment for that particular, because I'm actually not sure that maybe I missed it. So wait, Eric, do you mean there are moments when she's not actually breaking the fourth wall, but she's commenting to herself, or
yeah, I nothing immediately no line immediately sticks out in my head, but I do remember seeing moments where these sort of mutterings under the breath, right? The statements are there, but it doesn't seem to be directed at the audience. And so I'm just unsure, like, is that another example of her talking to us that the other characters surrounding her in the diegesis don't hear, or do they? And is it just kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, the entire narrative structure is definitely different from the way that other stories are being told, right? Just that mixture of seriousness and humor. I mean, Wong is like the Sorcerer Supreme, but he's gonna throw down with this low rent Chris Angel. Right. That's how I experienced that character.
Yeah. I mean, we have seen this vibe in Deadpool, right? I mean, Deadpool executed it brilliantly. And what's wonderful about this time is they're taking all that style and that energy and basically putting in a feminist type story, which accentuates. I mean, when Deadpool looks at you in the camera, he's making a joke, and it's rarely political. It's rarely, sociological or anything. But when she looks at you, it's like, okay, feminism 101, look at this and pay attention, and don't pretend it didn't happen. So I agree. Yeah. So here's something I actually very much enjoyed about this episode, and that was them examining her sexuality. Right, and her sexuality as non I want to say Jen, but they're both Jen, so there's Jen the lawyer and Jen as She-Hulk is how I'm going to say it, right? And I very much appreciated her being very sexually attracted to the doctor, and then taking him home, and I very much appreciated her reaction the next day when he didn't accept her as Jen the lawyer. So I'm just, and there's a reason I enjoyed seeing that, because I don't think we see that enough, to be honest. I think we don't see women enjoying their sexuality as just individual agents without there being some nefarious plot line. And so I was delighted to just see her, dare I say, she was horny and she wanted to be with someone. And she took care of herself. She took care of him. They took care of each other. And then things didn't work out the next day. So I'm wondering how you guys responded to that whole sort of sequence.
I guess I'll start. So I loved it.
Yeah, they're waiting for you to start, Shelly.
Yeah, I know. I loved it also. But when I was watching it, it reminded me, and I'm going to mess up this quote. There's a quote about a woman who says, "Oh, they go to bed with the movie star and then they wake up with me." I can't remember which exact movie star. And it reminded me of that. I think she did, express her sexuality. She wanted to have sex. She had sex with this guy. But then in the morning, you see like she made breakfast, and like a nice breakfast, not like cereal. Right.
Exactly.
And then she wanted to talk to him or like have, some kind of conversation that was beyond the sex. And then he's just like disappointed in seeing her. And I think that also reflects like, and I'm an old married lady, right? But like when you're single and you like the night before, like everybody is much more attractive in the evening in those situations. But then in the morning, it's like, oh, right. Yeah. And I felt like that nod to a different kind of life than I have, or life that I had kind of previously. But I love that it was part of this show.
Something that I thought was interesting, and I'm not sure what the answer to this is, at least not yet, 4 episodes in. But she was very assertive as She-Hulk throughout the date, and particularly in the moment when she sort of does a role reversal and like lifts him up and takes him to a room. But what's interesting about that is physically Jen would not have been able to lift up however, I don't know how much this guy weighed, but he looked pretty heavy. But even mentally, would she be allowed to express that kind of assertiveness? Mentally and emotionally, would Jen in ordinary life before She-Hulk have been allowed societally and culturally to express that without men being like, whoa, that's a little too, I'm supposed to do that or something like that, Whereas as She-Hulk, she's kind of allowed that, right? Because it's clear, and I think maybe on some level she knew that all these men were interested in She-Hulk. She thought finally she had met somebody who was maybe interested in the whole person, but she knew on some level that they were interested in She-Hulk, and so I think maybe she was, she felt that she could express a part of herself or part of her sexuality that would not be as maybe well received as plain old Jen. Being really confident, being really assertive, just kind of like getting to the point, so to speak. And so that was kind of interesting.
I have all kinds of world reaction to this whole conversation, because I agreed. her psychology is a bit different when she's Jen She-Hulk versus Jen attorney at law. And as I said earlier in the episode, we kind of expect of the world what we see of it all the time. And I think it's very healthy for young girls, young women, to see images of women taking sexual leadership. Because one thing that does happen in moments of taking sexual leadership, regardless of gender, is the potential risk of denial. And that is not something we talk about. And the fact that when someone makes a move like the guy, hey, two ladies, you're alone here, disqualified right there, right? I mean, it's written like that. And at the same time, that guy's taking a risk because he was denied. He was rejected. And so I think the sort of rejection possibilities that come with sexual interaction are something we don't talk about enough. And so I have actually talked about this with my kids. Who's making the move? And why would you not make the move? And another thing is when we had I'll just say that I got other stuff to talk about, but anybody want to say the same thing about the idea of the leadership risk dynamic? Or is that not something to talk about?
No,
Go ahead.
I think that you're right. I mean, we grew up, most of us, in the fact that it's supposed to be the man that does all the moves, initiating. And I think it's positive to see that women could do those things too.
Yep.
And especially like for women or younger girls who would be watching this, that it's fine. You don't have to wait for a man. If you're interested in something, you can go after it. If you're not, you can say no.
Yes.
So no, I agree. I thought that was really smart to weave that into this. And we don't see a lot of other superheroes or other superhero shows, movies addressing the sexuality issue. And so I liked seeing it.
Eric or Daniel? Okay, then.
Actually, well, I did have another thing to say, but I wanted to let Eric, if you wanted to say something about that point, or.
No, I like most of what you're saying. Most of what I react to would be taking us in a different direction, so I'm kind of holding off until we're ready for that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just quickly add as a last thing on that scene that I would like to see maybe at some point, either in the season or series, Jen as Jen, attorney at law, be like that. Regardless of whether she got well received or rejected, or maybe rejected. I don't know, but to not feel that she can only be that way in She-Hulk form. Yeah.
So I agree. And what I love about what you said was be that way. Because in our culture, in those moments, there is a that way. In other words, when she decides to play the sexual leadership role, she gets kind of guy swarmy, right? She, hey, baby, not quite that language like the same guy back at the bar, but it's still this sort of alluring sort of vibe that she puts off to kind of let him know. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. What I'm saying is that's how it tends to play out. And if we're concerned about gender inequity, if we're concerned about things, then maybe a little training for folks about what it's like to be in that state and how to actually manage that state. So, because, we don't train kids what happens when you're rejected. We don't train people how to handle other people's leadership requests gently, right? And those moments are important because they're so emotionally deep. And it's straight up rejection when the answer is no, right? So what we end up learning is how to pretend like it didn't matter when we're rejected, which is precisely what she does. She goes, oh yeah, what did she say? An empathic doctor is a cliche anyway, or something, something along those lines. So I do hope.
Child doctor.
Exactly.
Pediatric doctor.
Exactly.
So there was an earlier moment that I think resonates with kind of what you're talking about too, Scott, was that the sort of the tension of who's going to pay the bill.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was all completely slow motion. Of course, it comes off with a gag where he wasn't really going to sort of struggle with her about who was going to pay the bill. He was perhaps just
Right.
looking for a reason to go. But I remember watching it and thinking, why can't y'all just put the two cards down and say split it in half?
Yeah.
Oh, because he ain't paying nothing. Let's
Well,
make it
and
clear.
I realize that's that
he ain't gonna
character.
play nothing.
That's how they wrote it. But once again, what I resonated with was going back to, back in my dating days where there was a lot more emphasis on, the guy pays all the time.
Right.
And could just
you're right, man. How come we're not training our kids to solve that crap before you go out? Just have the conversation about the cash, and honestly have conversations about sex.
Yeah.
I may take away from the mood, but the problem is those moments remain so emotionally intense. Your cognition's gone. That's why it's wonderful sex. You're not thinking, right? But you're not bringing your best rational assets to bear and making yourself vulnerable to doing things that may not work out the way you want. I know I'm belaboring this issue. I just love the fact that they put it on the screen and it allows us to have this conversation, because I love the fact, and I gotta be careful, when she gets rejected the next day, what the writer's telling you is that for Jen, the sex is not disposable. It wasn't just a roller coaster ride for a night that didn't come with a sort of expectation of liking each other later. And I think that's another thing that we just don't talk about, right? There's a whole vibe out there about, sex is disposable. And when I end up speaking to people about these things, my question is, well, ask yourself how you're going to feel the next day if he or she doesn't call you or doesn't want to go out, or they go out with someone else the next night. And if that's going to bother you, then it's not disposable. And there's nothing wrong with being horny. It's awesome. But we don't teach our kids how to manage it. And then we set them up for these highly intense emotional states that make them vulnerable. And I know I'm belaboring the point, but this has been an important issue for me, raising kids. I'm going to teach you how to manage this stuff, right? And have those thoughts ahead of time. And, then make your choice and, Scott shutting up now. So what do you guys think about all that?
Nothing's great. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I was going to say, as a victimologist, I'm always feel like, all the time talking about consent and what does that mean. And people don't want to talk about, they don't want to say certain things. They don't want to ask for consent. I have a male friend who told me that he was asking for consent with women that he was intimate with. And they were like, can't you just shut up? Like, why are you asking me? And like, that was really interesting to me because, I'm always like, yeah, you should ask for consent. Make sure that, the person likes what you're doing. And the women were just like, stop, like asking. And so we need these conversations, and we need to say that it's all right to talk, about what you want or don't want.
Yep. The problem is once you're into it, you're switching different parts of the brain on and off. And so when someone says, dude, just shut up, it's because I don't want that part of my brain working right now. That's the psychology of sex. We got masters, what's the couple that did the sex studies?
Johnson, Masters and Johnson.
Right. And they did a third person observation about sex, but that's not the phenomenology of the moment. It's not the phenomenology. We don't know about the phenomenology of violence, right? And these are psychological states that get us to do extremely vulnerable things for ourselves and for others. And we just still talk about it from third person. And that doesn't help our kids, right? All right. Is there anything else that stuck out to you guys about this episode?
Well, so for me, these moments of intimacy were part of it, but I experienced this episode much as within the entirety of what we've been building to, and that's this issue of identity, right? There's this very much the Hulk aspect, if you will, or that Hulk situation has been sort of thrust upon her, right? She didn't choose that. And early on in the episode, she talks about that. Like, you know, she wants her career. She doesn't want to be a superhero, but people are sort of forcing her into that position up till now. And then when she first goes to start her dating profile, she's like, I already have to be She-Hulk at the office all the time.
Yeah.
I want to be just me, right? But then she later then chooses to create a profile, right? And then she experiences people who only want this She-Hulk portion of her persona. So I think this is just this, you know, plain old Jen, I think she refers to herself, and then She-Hulk Jen, right? They are both her, right? And so being outside the superhero narrative, we all have aspects of ourselves that we may have to reconcile with trying to build a coherent self-concept, right? And in some cases, maybe some aspects of those we have to play up and we wish we wouldn't, vice versa. And I'm just excited to see how they build this arc of self-concept change and integration. And if they're listening and they don't do that, they will disappoint me. Not that may matter to them.
The gauntlet has been thrown.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just.
Yeah, so last week, go ahead.
Oh, and just in this episode, so much of our self-concept is bound up in who likes us and who doesn't, and how they value us and what aspects they value. So this particular episode was all about the social, you know, romantic-ish aspect of ourselves was the focus of this one for me.
Yeah. So last week, during our conversation, we talked about if you're comfortable enough or fortunate enough to believe you know who you are, it's because you and your world haven't changed enough, right? In other words, if you and your world are staying fairly stable, you can just feel like I know who I am. Shows like this, what they do is reveal how contextually bound your identity always is. And it goes back to that idea of identity follows circumstance, right? We can feel ourselves whole when we're in a world that doesn't feel like it's changing much. And, you know, the COVID world really disrupted everybody's world. So I don't know of any studies that have been done to show massive identity disruption. We definitely had cultural identity disruption during that time period, right? I'm not sure what there are any data on an individual level, but I'm sure that it's there. Absolutely.
Well, they've done a lot of studies that have been coming out recently on feelings of exclusion during COVID, right? But this sort of how the lockdown and forced exclusion has made us feel disconnected. And there have been some folks who've been talking about, you know, for extroverts, for people who do tie their identity up in social interaction, right? That they in particular felt sort of socially dislodged and like they lost aspects of themselves they couldn't express in the same way. So I think that
well, they should have started a podcast, right? And have people on every week and talk about stuff. That's exactly, you know, you're gonna find your peeps and try to make it happen. Absolutely. Yeah. What about the comedy in this episode? I just thought what was her name? I gotta get her name. Vanessa with a
Madison, isn't it Madison?
Not what you think.
Exactly. Madison with a Y and two N's, and they're not where you think they are. And then she spells her name out in the courtroom, and you see one of the other attorneys kind of scratching out what he wrote down because he was trying to actually get the Y and the N's in the right place. The comedy in this show is just, it's Rick and Morty level because Jessica Gao's at the helm. Any other comments on the quality of the comedy?
I loved The Sopranos.
Oh my God.
She ruined it. She ruined that. Because that's like, if you watch The Sopranos, that's like a really big episode in this series. And then she ruins it for him.
Oh
and
my.
I really loved that.
I love what they're doing with Wong in terms of, you know, she comes into a room in the beginning and you hear that music, and I'm thinking, what the hell is that? And then, oh my God, that's The Sopranos. And then he's sitting down, smoking a cigar, dancing with it. I said, all right, I love it. They're giving Wong some character. Absolutely loved it. And then she came in and they had a crazy conversation. And then the whole spoiler thing.
I got a thought about that dynamic. Obviously, it does flesh out the characters and it adds to the humor. But
Yeah.
upon rewatching that episode, I wonder if they're not going to make more out of this as a plot point, because it's sort of a throwaway line
Mhm.
at the beginning when she's introduced in Wong's house, and then when she's in the courtroom, she made a deal with a demon that she's not supposed to talk about. Right? He took 6 drops for blood, which immediately made me think of some aspects of Belasco and magic in the X-Men series, but that's a whole other podcast. But she drops a heart when she's in there.
She sure did.
She keeps coming back to him. He's the Sorcerer Supreme.
Yeah.
Who has access to all of these magical relics. I just really wonder
Yeah.
if they've got some other level there. Her last Sin, Syn. I mean,
Yeah. I have no response. I mean, they wrote that so flippantly, right? It was there purely for the humor, that if they do end up taking it and writing it into a line or a plot point, that would be actually very interesting, because that female character was pretty one-dimensional, right? Just kind of there doing her party gal thing or whatever, calling him Wongers.
But again, there's that moment in the courtroom where she's like, that I'm not supposed to talk about, which once again we could throw off, but it's like, no, I don't know.
No, I absolutely loved it.
And then she did talk about him, right? So I thought, oh, because the very fact you're saying I'm not supposed to talk about him, you're talking about him.
Right. They were writing her on a certain side of the IQ distribution, if that's hard for me to say, but that they were writing her to be. Yeah, you're right.
Well, and there's a picture of her and the goat in the ending credits as they're drawing.
Yes.
She signs a contract. She signs like a contract or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think Eric. I think now that I didn't think of it, but now that you're talking about it, I think you might be right. And I think it'll be really interesting, especially because of the one-dimensional way they introduced her. And obviously these writers are too smart to have done that like accidentally. So I think she may very well be revealing additional layers later.
She looked a lot like Elizabeth Olsen. Is that going to get me in trouble? I mean, when she came on, she just looked a lot like Elizabeth Olsen. I immediately thought of Wanda, right? And then what are they doing here? And then of course they played the character out. You mentioned that she does mention the demon's name. She goes, the demon, I think his name is Jake. And then one of the lawyers said, I know Jake. Yeah. So that's so Rick and Morty, right? This interdimensional kind of, I know the different dimensions kind of humor. Yeah, that'd be interesting if they brought her back. That'd be funny as hell. Anything else that stuck out to you guys about this episode?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I kind of took a very brief, because I couldn't handle too much of it, but a brief peek at what people were saying about the show in general, this episode on Twitter. It's very weird because I did not have the thought genuinely, like so far in any of the episode or for the show in general, that it didn't have action. She was fighting demons in this episode. She fought Thunderball and that gang. That was a really great scene in the alley. And yeah, it's not like, again, Infinity War level of action, right?
Thank God.
Epic.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah, thank God. I don't want to see that every time. That's boring. That's boring as hell. But like I saw some comments, and maybe it's just kids, I don't know, but like, oh, no action. I'm like, what are you talking about? And plus, I don't really want, like, what I love about the show is that it kind of is about this person's personal life and her career. And I think, was it Eric who mentioned this at the beginning, that it focuses, or maybe it was Shelly, it focuses on this in a way that I don't remember any other MCU title doing it to this extent. It's like Sex and the City, or it's like a sitcom about this woman's career and her personal life, and she just happens to be a superhero. She just happens to be She-Hulk. But that's not and it comes out obviously, but it's not the sole focus or the emphasis in a way it might be for one of the other shows or films. So one of the main things I love about this is it's really kind of just about her, and she's struggling to integrate this new aspect of herself, the identity, Eric, as you were talking about. And that's not just about like going from one fight to the next, you know. So I don't know. That's not really like some big insight or anything. But
what I am going to say is I think Jessica Gao knew this was going to happen because these episodes are all in the can.
Mhm.
They're all done. They're filming. And at the very beginning of this one, she's after we see Wong, she says, "Oh, you guys must be happy. You just saw Wong." And she says, "It's like giving the show Twitter armor for a week." Now that was written months ago, if not a year ago. So she knew this was all going to happen. And it's turning what might look like a problem into strength. I mean, when you can outwit people so much that you know what they're going to do a year ahead of time, and it's there. And again, it's just a moment where it happens in the show and it moves on. That's just the brilliance. And yeah, I haven't gone on Twitter and looked at that sort of stuff. To be honest, I just kind of imagine Twitter as a space where if I want to find hate about anything, I can go there and I can find it. And so because it's just persistent, I tend not to look for it. You know, as hate is going to hate, they're just there all the time. And I don't know. What do you guys think about it?
I would say, you know, and I love Marvel, obviously, but it can be really exhausting to have the same type of story all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not that I don't love where it's like super serious and we have to save the world and, you know, team up, and it's, you know, but it's also nice to have a break from that where it is funny or it is lighthearted, or yeah, I'm just a gal living my life. Sometimes I have to be a superhero. You know, and we talk about this pretty much every week, but there's room for all stories and there's room for all people. And I have looked at Twitter, and people need to calm down. It's the same thing when female Ghostbusters, female Doctor Who, female Iron Man, you know, it's the same kind of stuff. But, you know, I think the more that this comes mainstream, the more the hate, I think, will filter out because they see that, you know, this is the new frontier. This is the future.
They'll see that this is what the cool kids are doing, and they'll find something else to hate. I mean, that's the strength of Gal leaning into this so smartly and so clearly, is that we're just going to do this. Y'all are going to get left behind, right? And then you're going to have to either find somewhere else to go to hate because it's going to be uncool to hate, or you're going to join the crew. And since we know your Twitter feed, we'll be able to track where you were here and go where you are now. I mean, this public display of stupidity, it's there and it's never going away in terms of the record of what you said when you said it, right? It's just, so we know where it is in terms of the Twitterverse. We know it's being said, and yeah. Eric, you look like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say that in general, research on e-based communication suggests that regardless of medium, the quality of argumentation is not going to be the greatest, right? It's going to be a lot of driven by this affect, the feeling of anonymity that the internet gives you. And then with Twitter, given how few characters you have, it's even less likely to be a coherent argument. So I just don't read the comments because it makes me feel like my IQ drops after doing that. So I'm just like, nope, no, thank you.
Well, you know, this point of anonymity is actually very important because Democratic Party has been spending lots of money, sending lots of money to extreme Republican candidates so that they win their primaries and lose whatever general election they're in. So if we were to find out down the road that certain people are anonymously putting a lot of hate out there about these kind of things in order to drive it into the public conversation, I wouldn't be terribly surprised, right? In other words, hate's powerful, it's high amplitude, it's contagious, and it makes people talk. It makes
True.
people talk about what it's doing. So, yeah, Twitter's a public square. Yeah.
And I just feel like, though, maybe it's just me, and I've got so much stuff that I still need to watch and want to watch, that if I don't like a show,
No,
I'm just going to go watch something else. So it's like, hey,
Exactly.
if you don't like it, why you spending extra energy unless that's what you
Right.
want? Go watch something that you want to watch. Go watch the Magacy or something like that. I don't know. I'm sorry. Did I go there? I guess I
no. If you're doing, if you're going to talk identity, right,
Mhm.
then, and people are doing this authentically, as opposed to what I was proposing, which was non-authentically. If people are actually expressing hate that they actually have, that's just, wow. That's a lot of identity work, right? And it's virtual identity work. And when they get those likes for that hate, empathy works for hate groups too, right? You empathize with your in-group, you feel better about yourself. So, if that's authentic hate out there, it's kind of diagnostic of a lot that I would argue has always been there. It's just Twitter allows people to actually influence each other and share it and make it more real in terms of their own experiences. Yeah, I have kind of a rule. I only am sort of implemented it once, but if I don't like a show, I'm going to stop podcasting the show because I don't like negative. I don't like being negative. I have such incredible respect, even for Ed Wood, right? People who take the time to change the world, to put something out there. And, some of it's not going to meet standards I might have, but if I don't like it, maybe I should go out there and try to get a contract, try to get people to invest millions of dollars into my vision. And then, maybe I'll have something to say later. So, this show's so great. It's always a risk when you start a show, but this one, and this one is so great that it's very satisfying that we started this and we're actually going to go all the way through it. Yeah. All right. Any final comments on this episode? All right, then, you guys, why don't you tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we will start with Daniel.
Yeah, I think really the main thing currently that I kind of want to just put out and promote would be my podcast. So thisistheend.net is the URL for the podcast itself, but you can find it on any podcast player like Spotify or Google Player or Apple Podcast. Just type in "This Is the End" or type in "pop culture and collapse" and one of those two phrases, and you'll get and it should come up. So this is the end, pop culture and collapse.
Fantastic. Whenever I hear "This Is the End," I think of Jim Morrison and the Doors. I don't know if you guys know the song.
Of course.
That's the instant vibe I get from that. Okay, how about you? Oh, and Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Loved you being here. How about you, Eric?
Thank you.
Well, I also hear the Doors in my head when I see his
This
podcast.
is the end. Doo-doo-doo.
But so you can find me on Twitter at Eric Wesselmann. You can find a lot of my professional stuff on the Department of Psychology's webpage at Illinois State University. I also write a film blog if you Google Normal Theater Film Culture.
Fantastic. And Eric, thank you for being on the show today. Very much appreciated your contributions. How about you, Shelly?
I'm at Dr. Clevenger on Twitter, and I appeared on Daniel's podcast, which is my favorite podcast. And even when I'm not on it, I listen to it on my way to work. So I highly recommend it. My favorite episode is actually not my episode. It's the V for Vendetta episode that he did. So everyone should check it out.
There you go.
Oh, thank you so much, Shelly.
And where can they find you on social media, Shelly?
Oh, at Dr. Clevenger on Twitter.
Very cool. And you can find all episodes of She-Hulking at Dark Loops Productions on YouTube. If you want to write in, tell us what we got right, tell us we got it wrong, please do so at darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next episode. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs, and remember, smash the patriarchy.
Smash the patriarchy.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.